Welcome. Thank you for joining me for this first of the 5-part series on yoga, mindfulness, and body-based interventions. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that we can take a look at the PowerPoint that I prepared. And then I'll introduce myself and what we're going to be doing in this particular series. So my name is Jessica Gletton. I've been a clinical social worker since 2003. I've been practicing yoga for about over 20 years, and I've been incorporating yoga into my mental health practice for about the last 8 years. And I've found that yoga and body-based interventions is particularly effective in helping people to reconnect with their body in a different way that could be really positive for their mental health. So I put together this series so that we could explore this a little bit more and look at how we can incorporate yoga, mindfulness, and other body-based interventions into our day-to-day life and our own practice. So before we begin, let's actually do a little bit of this. So we'll pause and take a moment to check in. So you might turn your gaze down away from the computer. If it's comfortable for you, you might close your eyes. And before doing anything, take a moment to notice, what are you feeling in your body right now? This might be physical sensations, emotions, or something else. Without judgment, notice what's present. And begin to bring your awareness to your breath. Notice your natural breath without changing anything. You might notice if your breath is a little bit shallow or fast, or anything else that's present. We're going to explore a 3-part yogic breath. If it's useful for you, you could place one hand on your chest and one hand on your belly to better feel the movement of your breath. So for this breath, as we inhale, we're going to bring the air into our belly, let our belly rise. Continue to inhale into your chest. Inhale into your shoulders, and then reverse that. Exhale, shoulders drop, chest drops, and belly empties. Full deep breaths. Inhale, belly, chest, and shoulders. Exhale, shoulders, chest, and belly. Continue this for 3 or 4 more slow, deep breaths at your own pace. Doesn't have to be the same pace as I might be breathing, but full deep breaths, allowing all 3 sections to fill up completely and empty completely. Let's take one more breath this way. Inhale, belly, chest, shoulders. Exhale, shoulders, chest, and belly. When that feels complete, you can release your hands down if they're on your body. And then take a moment now to check back in and see how your body and perhaps your mind are feeling. Notice if anything might be a little bit different, and it's possible that it's not. It's also possible that something might feel a little bit different. Again, there's no wrong answer. Our idea is that we're beginning to explore the body and find a better connection. As you're ready, if your eyes are closed, you can begin to flutter them open and perhaps bring your attention back to the screen. So I told you a little bit about myself at the beginning of this presentation, but you might wonder, who exactly is this training for? There's lots of different people that this could be useful for. So you might be a yoga instructor and you just want to learn a little bit more about trauma and how we can be sensitive and aware of what our students might be going through. On the opposite end, you could be a therapist, a mental health professional, and you're interested in learning a little bit more about how to bring yoga or mindfulness or other body-based interventions into your clinical practice. You could also be none of these and just an interested person who wants to find out a little bit more. So how this is structured is we have 5 main parts, and then we'll hopefully have some optional video examples coming up. So we're going to do a little bit of an overview today. Our next session will look at the introduction to trauma, so some basic information about trauma that you might want to know about. Our third section will look at neurobiology with a particular emphasis on the vagus nerve, because the vagus nerve plays a very important role as we look at body-based interventions. In section 4, we're going to be a little more specific about trauma-informed yoga, specifically looking at the practice of yoga. In section 5, we'll be a little more specific about mindfulness and trauma-informed mindfulness, including meditation. After that, hopefully we'll have a couple of optional example videos, just so you might see how this looks in real life. That should be coming soon. So the first thing that people often ask are, what are body-based interventions? So when we're looking at body-based interventions, we're looking at how we can use the physical body and the sensations in the body to interrupt the way that we have previously adapted to trauma, stress, or anxiety, depression, whatever it is, in really unhealthy ways, ways that in the long term are not going to benefit us. This can have lots of different areas. It could be yoga, it could be mindfulness and meditation, and it could be lots of other things. The basic idea is that these are what we call bottom-up approaches, and we'll talk about that more later. Using the body to influence the brain instead of talking through things to try to influence the brain to the body. So yoga is probably the best known and the best researched of these different activities. But there's lots of other things as well. So dance, if it's done mindfully and with intention, could be a body-based intervention. Tai Chi and or other martial arts can also be used in very similar ways to yoga. There's lots of breathing exercises or pranayama that we can do. One of the really cool things about the breath that we've learned is that it is the one part of our body that is both voluntary and involuntary. So we can make the choice to change our breath in ways that actually influences our nervous system, which is, I think, pretty cool. We have progressive muscle relaxation, massage or self-massage, a whole host of different mindfulness exercises, as well as a lot of different meditation practices. And then lastly, we have something called eye rest, which is a section of Yoga Nidra. Yoga Nidra itself can be considered a body-based intervention, but eye rest was specifically created as a guided resting meditation that will help people who have experienced trauma. It was originally created for military veterans who've experienced trauma. So for eye rest, you do have to be specially trained. However, Yoga Nidra, or the yoga of sleep, can be practiced and led by anyone who has a little bit of experience in this area. So you don't need a special training or certificate for that particular version for Yoga Nidra in general. So there might be other things that are not on this list. This is just an example of what might be a body-based intervention or a way that we can use our body to change our mental health states. So how does this happen? What actually happens is that the more we find awareness of our body, the more we create an opportunity for our brains to actually shift and change. We're actually rewiring our brain to fit these new experiences. And this change or shift in the brain is called neuroplasticity. This means that the neurology of our brain actually has the ability to change over time. So this is not something that's going to happen with one episode of a practice, one session of yoga nidra, one session of yoga. It takes a little bit of time, but it does actually change over time and rewire our brain. We have a saying that neurons that fire together, wire together. So the more often we create this new neural pathway, the stronger it's going to be. In these different practices, our attention is shifting to our internal experience. So we're not using that cognitive processing part of our brain. We're not thinking, we're experiencing in our body what's happening. And when this happens, time actually slows down naturally. So when we intervene through our body experiences, this allows us to create a new connection to the body. It helps us to build trust in our body and strengthen effective action. So it actually can create some empowerment so that people can feel more able to make changes in their life. So when we're looking at any of our mental health challenges, perhaps trauma, perhaps something else, what this really means is that in the context of a safe relationship, and that's very important, we're building more robust interoceptive pathways so that we can have an empowered experience in our body as a reasonably predictable and safe place. And this safety issue is a really important one. So for many people, the body becomes a not very safe place, especially if you've had situations where trauma has taken place. So the body might not feel safe to be in, and other people might not feel safe to be around. So we're working on both of these levels. We're creating a safe relationship with the individual's own body, as well as a safe relationship with another person, whether you're in the role of a therapist or a yoga instructor. It's that safe relationship that's important. So keep that in mind. That's really, really important. That's kind of the foundation of the work. Until people feel safe, you can't really move on to the other areas. So a few definitions of types of sensations, because I know these words might not be familiar to you, and some people pronounce them in different ways. So just be aware that you might hear that as well. So we have exteroceptive senses, and that is the nerves related to our five senses. This is what gathers information about what's happening outside the body. So this can be everything from I can see the couch or the television over on that side of the room, to I feel the temperature of the room from my skin, or I hear people talking outside, whatever that might be. We're using our senses to know what's happening around us. The other side of that is interoceptive. So that's the nerves that relate to what's happening inside our bodies, and it provides that embodied sense of self. So this is what might tell you that perhaps you have a headache, or maybe you're hungry, or maybe you notice a tightening through your chest or belly, and that tells you that maybe you're starting to get angry or nervous. That is those interoceptive nerves telling you what's happening. This could also be nerves that tell you physical sensations in your body, such as my back is sore today, or my hamstrings are tight, or anything like that. What we want to create is a dual awareness. We want to be able to know what's happening outside and inside at the same time. So we're working to create, through our yoga practice or a mindfulness practice or whatever it might be, that dual awareness. The dual awareness helps people stay in the present moment, which is often a challenge for people who've had trauma in the past. One other word that might be useful is proprioception, and that's the awareness of one's body in relation to the space around it. So for example, people who've experienced a lot of trauma and feel that the body is not safe might not have a good sense of interoception. They might not feel what's going on inside them very much. They've checked out from their body as much as possible. And what happens in addition to that is the awareness of one's body in relation to the space around it also is decreased. So we might actually see that people who've experienced trauma are a little bit clumsy because the body's not safe, the space around it's not necessarily safe. So a little bit of clumsiness might be taking place because people are not as aware of their own body and the space around their body. So these three words can be really important to understand as we move forward into our practice of body-based interventions. And then one other note that I like to make, and there is some various ways of looking at this. This is the one that makes sense to me. So if we're looking at trauma-informed, that to me, and in a lot of the literature, means that whatever we're doing, any body-based intervention, is being performed knowing that some of the people we're working with may have experienced some kind of trauma. So that means if you're teaching a yoga class, you know that some people in the room may have had trauma in their life and they may react to different things going on in the class in a way that's different from the students who have not experienced trauma. So that might mean that a physical adjustment is a little bit more threatening, or a specific cue or word phrase might strike someone differently than someone who has not experienced trauma. That doesn't necessarily mean that you need to not do all the things that could possibly trigger someone, because that's not really possible. We don't know what's a trigger for people, and there's really not a limit to what could be a trigger. So what we do is in a trauma-informed class, such as a yoga class, we have someone who's teaching it that knows that people may have experienced trauma, and they try to be sensitive to it in a way that's useful for the whole group. So for example, you might, as a yoga instructor, when everyone's in a position with their eyes closed and they can't look around, you might have people raise their hand if they don't want physical adjustments during class. You might avoid specific kinds of phrases, or you might avoid specific positions, or what you could do is offer some options. And that's one of the best things that you can do in a trauma-informed class or any other class, is to give people options. If this thing doesn't feel right in your body, do this other thing instead, or whatever works for you. So trauma-informed, you just have that general awareness, and you're looking out for specific signs that someone is reacting to your class in a way that might not be particularly helpful for them. This is particularly for people who are maybe teaching in a yoga studio, just to the general public, or you're teaching at the YMCA or something like that. On the other hand, trauma sensitive means that the exercise, the yoga class, the mindfulness practice, whatever it is being performed specifically to assist with a mental health diagnosis. So you're teaching a trauma-sensitive yoga class, or a trauma-sensitive yoga class that's focused on depression, or something like this. This particular class or individual session needs to be taught by someone who has some clinical experience in working with trauma and other mental health diagnoses. And it's also going to be specifically created and tailored towards those symptoms. So you might have a yoga for depression class. You might have a mindfulness for anxiety class, or something of that nature. We're really specifically targeting people with that diagnosis, and we have the clinical experience to support them with that diagnosis. So trauma sensitive is a completely different category. This is not something you will typically find at the YMCA or a yoga studio. You'll find this a little bit more in a mental health clinic. So if you might have a therapist that works within a setting and also does this as well. So those are a couple of things that you might keep in mind as we begin this series. So there's going to be future sessions that focus a little bit more specifically on some of our trauma issues. A little bit of trauma 101 is what I like to call it in my university classes. Again, we're going to look a little bit more at the neurobiology piece. We're going to specifically break down yoga and mindfulness and look at some of the issues within that people should be aware of for both trauma-informed and trauma-sensitive work. And I geared them a little bit more towards trauma-informed because I know not everyone who's watching this is going to be a mental health professional, and that's great. This is information that everyone should have, not just people who are in that field. So hopefully this will give you a little bit more of an opportunity to explore how these different issues can be helpful for people and how we can better incorporate the body into our day-to-day work and our day-to-day personal practice as well, so that we can all be a little bit more stable and happy and connected with both our mind and our bodies. So I hope this introduction was useful for you, and I hope that you are able to come back for our next section, where we're going to look at kind of our Trauma 101. What are the basic things that you should know about trauma? Thank you for being here.